Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack, but what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/keeper. Picture your team being able to map out the external attack surface as it grows and see the same attack vectors as a hacker does. Most tools out there do asset discovery, but stop there. Enter Detectify. It takes an inventory of exposed web assets and automates vulnerability testing for security misconfigurations, expiring subdomains, and risks in third-party software. Here's the cool part. They crowdsource payloads from leading ethical hackers. It finds bugs you actually want to fix and finds them in time. Start a free 2-week trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Help Systems helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements to the next level by pairing with Cobalt Strike, a threat emulation tool ideal for adversary simulations and red team operations. Learn more at securityweekly.com/core security.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. And now it's time for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW262 if you want to check out the show notes, the news stories that we're covering today. Today we've got 15 of them, and boy, we've got funding, and some acquisitions.
It's a lot of fun kind of week.
It is. It's interesting to watch how this changes week to week. Like some weeks we have, like I swear we had a bunch of acquisitions, like 5 acquisitions and maybe 1 or 2 fundings. And it just ebbs and flows, I guess.
Yeah, I was looking through the list that we had today, and it's what's crazy about it is it's like raises 3.25, raises 150, raises 100, 56, 38, 25, 20. I mean, also, it just occurred to me, you did a great job putting them in order of size. I never noticed that.
I always do that.
Oh, look at you. Your OCD kicks in, and it's got to be in the right order. I love it, Adrian.
It is. It's, yeah, I mean, I need things organized, so I'm not scrambling while we're doing the news, like I know where to find things.
Thank God we have, a co-host or a lead host like you, because I would be the exact opposite. Shit would be everywhere. It'd be all confusing, and you wouldn't find anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So I've got a question for you and Katie. Are services becoming the new software? What is going on here with MDR and MSSPs? Like are they functioning as software companies? Because I gotta imagine there's a lot of people behind these MDR services. Obviously they're not pen testing firms, but they're raising tons of money. Arctic Wolf, now eSentire, like we're seeing these huge raises, and we're seeing them, investors treating them. It feels like software companies, like tech companies.
Yeah, but here's the catch on them. If you actually read that article, they raised $325 million in funding total, surpassing $100 million in revenue. If you had a good, strong, recurring revenue product,
it would be
SaaS
way more.
Product, $100 million, you'd be worth like $8 billion by this point.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah, but
I think it's a good way for software companies to merge themselves a little bit, because in a lot of cases, a software company will say, oh, really, it's really easy to deploy. It's really easy to use. And that's not necessarily the case. And you find a lot of end users who are scrambling. And these services are really necessary as a complement to that. And yeah, sorry, a little distracted here by a hungry cat.
What does Gus think?
Gus thinks that it's dinner time and there should always be servants, and so that is a service. He should always have someone at his beck and call. So he would be in favor of these software companies having services, and he wouldn't mind paying a premium either.
Managed cat feeding.
It's all about a couple things with the valuations, right? The compounding nature of revenue. And I'm sorry if you guys hear a little bit of a background noise. Somebody decided to start laundry in the room next to me, and that's the dryer, nice and loud.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
So sorry about that.
It's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's really
okay.
Not.
The compounding nature of the revenue streams of a SaaS software is where you get a lot of your multiple from. And so I think, when you're talking about a services-based model, it tends to be one and done. Now, if you could figure out how to create a recurring based services model, then that gets interesting. And if we read this eSentire article, they surpassed 100 million in annual recurring revenue, says the article, which is a little bit interesting if it is a bit of a services-based approach. So, it's going to be kind of neat to see how these valuations continue to ebb and flow. Obviously, I feel like we're at an extremely high peak right now in cyber valuations, when even companies like this are getting, decent sized multiples.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I starting off, at least in my early years, I didn't recall really seeing services companies raising money at all. So that alone, the fact that they've got these big raises was interesting to me. Even like, for example, when we saw Bishop Fox do a raise with ForgePoint, it was to build a product. It wasn't to grow the services side. But I feel like most of this has been with MDR. Most of the raises that we've seen, maybe it's just anecdotal, but I feel like most of the big raises we've seen has been MDR focused.
Yeah, I'm going to throw something at you here, Adrian, because I don't feel like I know the MDR space well enough. Is MDR a service, or is it truly a service-enabled product, as Katie was kind of dancing around, meaning like managed detection and response? Is a lot of that a product that they've created that they can sell as a service that they maybe adapt with some additional humans, right? Is it kind of a hybrid?
I think a lot of folks have found that it's really hard to sell without the human component. And I'm not completely sure how to answer that question, but I can tell you what I've seen, and that's looking at. I looked at 8 or 9 XDR vendors, and they all have humans behind the scenes. And in some cases, they're not that behind the scenes. Like you can, if you have an incident, you can call them up, and they don't bill you additional for that. That's actually built into the product, and they don't call themselves an NDR. They call themselves XDR. So I've seen both sides of it, where it's presented as a product but has services behind it in some form or fashion, even if it's not billed that way, or they bill it as a service. And clearly, for a lot of these, they've got to either white label somebody else's product, or they've got to build their own tooling to be able to do it.
At the end of the day, it comes down to the margins, right? If you can create a system, a software package that has 80 to 90% margins, you're going to have a higher multiple versus a service, which is going to have 20, 30, 40% margins, right? And so what I think you're probably seeing is a lot of these MDRs maybe 30, 40% when they start, but they start automating, innovating, creating technologies themselves. And it becomes a 40, 50, 60, even 70% margin. And when you start to get that high, you can get a real good multiple.
Yeah, and really it's the build versus buy. Some of these companies, versus going out and acquiring tools, will build their own, so they're purpose built for their clientele. And then you've got the influx of customers who may need help because of the real or perceived talent shortage. because of the increase in cyber attacks, cyber activity, digital transformation. There's just a lot more going on. And so I think that all probably contributes to this interest in bolstering they're almost like hybrid companies, because they're not pure services companies, they're not platform companies, like Tyler just said. So it's almost this hybrid that serves dual purpose.
Yeah, I agree. Hybrid, I think, is a good term for it, even though it does tend to be somewhat overused for different things in the industry. I think it's accurate. Like what do you do if you can't hire detection engineers because Datadog, and Jimmy hired them all and took them all?
Right. If you're a vendor, you're paying a premium. If you're an end user, you're losing out good candidates to vendors.
Right. Yeah, very interesting market to watch, and interesting because CRA has actually acquired a company. So this story is actually from MSSP Alert, which is now part of Cyber Risk Alliance, and they're going to start up a show that's entirely focused on managed security. It's going to be called Managed Security Weekly, and that's how big this industry is that there's enough to make a whole separate podcast on it. All right, so moving on, I'm not even sure if check really belongs in here. They're calling it cybersecurity, but that's always been a point of contention with me. Companies in the fraud space, if they really belong in the security space, because the fraud space is, I feel like, probably just as big as cybersecurity, and I'm not terribly familiar with it. A lot of it tends to be less technology focused, more process focused. Or I mean, some of it's technology focused, but the security team, right? Security team is generally not the buyers for this kind of product.
Well, it depends, right? So I think they've got web fraud, ad fraud, payment fraud. There's all sorts of different fraud. My brief review of check, which I know very little about, basically on the skim of the article here, is that it's ad fraud centered around making sure that it's human beings that are checking the ads and not the bots. I think that's a cybersecurity play compared to, say, like fraud, like financial fraud, transaction-based financial fraud for financial backends and transfers and things like that, which, sure, that's cybersecurity in some sense, but it's more bank security, traditional bank security. So in this particular case, I do think the ad fraud space is interesting. I don't know anything really about their company short of what was in the article, but one thing that caught my eye when I did read the article is that they said, we are a category leader with revenue in the tens of millions of dollars, and we're getting $1 billion valuation, which is like, hey, all right, tens of millions, it's all it takes these days, and it's probably low tens at that. But they are at 200 employees and growing to 350 this year, 120 people based in Israel, and they're looking to grow that Israeli presence to over 200. So, it did take a little longer. This also caught my eye. They started the process for fundraising in October, and just closed it 10 days ago. So October through February, 4 months. Not a super long time, but it certainly wasn't a hyper aggressive round where we're seeing preemptive rounds in many, many cases where people don't even start a formal process for a raise. They literally just have investors beating down their doors constantly until they give up and allow them to buy a piece of the company. That's happening more often than not these days.
Yeah, I love this article. It's like the most honest and open fundraising press release I've ever seen. Like there's the quote in here from one of the founders. 150 million is still an unimaginable sum for me. Well, I hope you can imagine it pretty quickly, because you just got
you're about to open your bank account and see the zeros at the end of the number.
Yeah, and you got to turn those zeros into growth.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when I was involved in an early funding round, 6, 8, 10 years ago, whatever it was. And it was kind of the first time it was like, you open up a bank account and see that many zeros. And literally, I mean, it's a bank account that you're the administrator of. Like, you can pull the money out, do whatever the hell you want with it. Obviously, there's fiduciary commitments that you have to
do. Well, they probably have a fraud department that is not the same as this fraud department that checks against that.
They might, but it is weird to open up, and you have your Silicon Valley Bank app on your phone. You open it up and you see all these zeros, and you're like, "Holy smokes!"
So yeah, I kind of tangentially know what happens when you do stuff with that money that your investors don't approve of. But that's a different story for another time, not on air.
It does not end well. It does not end well, Adrian.
It didn't. It did not end very well. Moving on, Beyond Identity also becomes a unicorn. We got to be close to 50 at this point. I think we started the year with like 41, 42, and we've had, I think, at least one unicorn almost every episode since. So I'm thinking we're nearing 50 unicorns.
But we got to be higher than that. We got 4 or 5 this week alone.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't gone back and counted them yet. Yeah, I think it was CB Insights that has the really good list of all the unicorns. So I'll have to check that. But Beyond Identity is building out an MFA product. So that's part of what this funding is going to be used for. It's going to be R&D, and then part of it is just for expansion into other regions. They're fairly mature at this point. This is Series C. Brings their total to $205 million. And this has been a big topic. Actually, not MFA for employee or customer or user-facing stuff, but more for administrative stuff. This is a conversation I saw going on in one of the Slacks I was in recently, and just talking about how big of a challenge it is to do for administrators. It's a bit of a different problem to solve there, and I think Beyond Identity plays a little bit in that space.
Yeah, the other thing that caught my eye on this one is invisible multi-factor authentication, right? It's not just pure MFA, it's IMFA, I guess, if you want to use a cheesy term for it, but cryptographically binding user identities to their devices and eliminating passwords. Once again, and we've had this conversation on the show multiple times.
They're talking about certs.
Right, is finding ways to get rid of passwords, period, full stop, across the board. Not just making it easier to remember the damn things, but getting rid of them. In this particular case, it's targeted toward, administrative communications and things like that. But at the end of the day, those used to be passwords as well. So anytime that we can get rid of those credentials, I think we're going to be better off. So it's pretty exciting. And if you skim to the bottom of this article, Adrian, there are nearly 60 cybersecurity unicorns, and more than half achieved this status in 2021, according to this article.
Yeah, maybe they're counting unicorns a little different. So we had that issue with CB Insights where I think they leaned further on the fraud side than we would on how they counted unicorns. So gotcha. That's interesting in itself. Is that we don't even have the same count of unicorns because we can't even agree, what's cybersecurity and what's not, and where that line is drawn.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, our count is right, their count is wrong. It's that simple.
Yeah, we'll see how that ends up. I don't know how 60 unicorns exit or have happy exits. I mean, they're all going to exit.
Didn't we previously discuss what's the herd of a unicorn? Is it herds of unicorns? Is that what they are? Is that what we decided?
A
collection of unicorns is known as a what?
A yard?
A yard of unicorns.
Is that correct?
If that is correct, there we go. That's the start to the yard of unicorns that we're collecting here at Enterprise Security Weekly.
A blessing. No, it's called a blessing.
Oh, it's a blessing. That sounds right. Yeah, it's definitely a blessing. Okay. Yeah, man, this blessing is getting big. It's a blessing that we're seeing the blessing. And the question is, where does the blessing exit? How do we exit a true blessing of unicorns? I think that's worthy of like a blog post.
Yeah. Bless their hearts. Had to. Appropriate.
Had to be done.
All right. So we've got a couple here. 4 and 6 are both companies that automate really irritating, just grindstone compliance work. SOC 2s. Like I'm constantly hearing people talk about, working on their SOC 2. And HIPAA as well. So Secureframe raised $56 million, and they've got a platform that automates at least some of this. I haven't really been able to look at these very close, but yeah, even back when I was doing PCI, when I was a PCI QSA, I could think of tons and tons of stuff you could do to automate the kind of stuff that I would ask people for, like samples. Like as auditors, we do samplings, like take a screenshot of this, show me some logs from this, show me where you've done this. Almost, I think I even did a project once where, I looked at how much of PCI of the 300 plus requirements in the PCI DSS standard could be automated. And it was something like 80% of it. It was a lot. And nobody was doing that. So I can totally see how you could make a ton of money by saving tons of time for companies that have to get a SOC 2 or high tech or HIPAA compliance or, some of the stuff.
It's an incredible burden, and so much of it is still done manually. So this is anything that can help is great. I am, because I don't know these companies, I am interested in how this works and how much can actually be automated versus it's just a little bit more of a guidance tool, like a wizard to walk companies through it. Because in the past, we've seen tools that have claimed to help with compliance and automation, help automate compliance. And it just ends up being more like a wizard, a guided tool to help people answer the questions that they need to answer. But it is a big problem because there's a huge and growing number of requirements that companies need. It also helps them when it comes to audit time, if they have everything in one place. It's an interesting space, and I'd love to learn more about this because I do think especially bigger companies have so many requirements to satisfy, and they have huge teams spending significant effort on it.
So here's my hot take on compliance. Compliance is stupid. It should never be done in isolation. Compliance is an outcome of continuous, strong cybersecurity program. And if you approach your cybersecurity program in a way where you're collecting information, automating the collection of the information, automating the comparisons and gaps against compliance, you will know at all times whether you're compliant or not. That's how compliance needs to occur. And I think a lot of compliance tools approach it as a checkbox, and it's just not the right way to do it.
Yeah, well, I totally. I think the issue, though, is that people get so caught up and there's so much money in and there's so much focus on, at least a few times a year, managing these audits that companies don't really need to, they don't really know what to do and they don't know how to manage it. Yes, compliance should be an outcome of good security, but for so many companies, it's still the focus because of, because it's so big, because they don't have enough people, because they don't know what they're managing, because of, conflicting requirements in compliance. It's that is the utopia, I think, what you just laid out there. But I think in reality, for so many companies, the reality is much more complex. Maybe it doesn't need to be, but so many companies haven't moved past either that checkbox mentality or that manual management.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. A lot of companies just haven't figured out how to get there. Whether it be process, people, technology, whatever it is, they haven't figured out how to make security be the driver of compliance and not the other way around. Because when you look at compliance and just say, oh, it would be wonderful if we could get our SOC 2. Well, yeah, it would be. That's great. But the right way to get SOC 2 is to be secure, not to just check all the boxes for a point in time and come back 12 months later and check it again. So, yes, I think it's a utopian view. I think it's the right way to do it, and I would love to continue to drive that into the collective consciousness of CISOs and security engineers out there. Is do security the right way, and compliance becomes the outcome.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of additional stuff there that you have to do for compliance, like for SOC 2s. Like if somebody's not available, to be interviewed, by the auditor, you got to push that off to the next week. There's a lot of requirements that maybe don't apply to your environment, so you have to spend time putting together the rationale for why you don't have to comply with this, or you have to. I'm trying to remember what we called them in PCI. They're doing away with them now, compensating controls. Yeah, so that, and it depends on the requirements. Some get very prescriptive, and you have to do more of that than others. And some of them, like PCI is completely pass fail. Like you've got to pass all 300 requirements, whereas NIST CSF and ISO, aren't really pass fail. That it's more of a fluid thing. So it's totally depends on the business and the compliance framework.
Tyler really just wants a checkbox that says, "This is stupid. I don't comply."
Exactly. That's exactly.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying it's not stupid. Certainly parts of it are stupid. I think in many cases it is necessary. And the clients I've had, like that's the kind of auditor I tried to be. It was the guy that gave you two answers to any question about compliance. I said, I'd give you the answer. Here's what you need to do to check the box. And here's what you should be doing. And sometimes those were the same thing, but often not. All right. So I found out, putting together the news today, that there's a cybersecurity company over in Nashville that I had never heard of before, Phosphorus Cybersecurity. What? Raised cool. $38 million to secure IoT devices. Had you ever heard of these guys?
Can't say that I have, but there's a lot of them that I haven't heard of. I'm curious how you secure an IoT device any different than you secure anything else, though.
Most of the IoT security stuff I've seen is stuff that you bake in when you build it.
Yep. Almost has to be, right?
Yeah, not a whole lot of bolt-on, but because IoT it tends to be so unique, it would be hard to bolt on stuff after the fact. But don't know a ton about it, but interesting to see that just a few less than 200 miles down the road from me, somebody raised a $38 million Series A. It's a big Series A too.
Yeah, and I can tell you how they got it too, because the Chris Ruland is the founder and CEO of Phosphorus Cybersecurity. I did not realize he lived in Nashville now. Did you say Nashville, by the way?
Nashville, yes.
Yeah. He used to live in Atlanta. He is one of the original founders, I believe, of ISS Security, if you can harken back to the late 90s. Early 2000s. Mm-hmm. Chris Ruland was a founder in that. He also did a company called Bastille Networks. And then he did another one after that. He was hooked up with a couple of companies I circled for a while. He raised a big A because he's Chris Ruland. He's been there. He's done that. He's been around the block. He was part of X-Force early on. Smart guy, very smart guy. So it's going to be interesting to see what he builds out of this. And I would highly recommend you connect with him in Nashville, Adrian. Okay. And I'm happy to make the introduction too, if it makes sense.
Sure. And it looks like it's an asset management solution.
Uh-oh. Coming at us, Katie.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, but it's just IoT. It's okay.
Their flagship solution, Phosphorus Enterprise, provides users with a complete inventory of IoT devices throughout their environment, showing the IP address, manufacturer, model, and firmware, so they have more transparency over security posture.
That's great. We definitely need more inputs into total comprehensive asset management. Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Sounds like they're more like a Rumble. Sounds like they're more like a Rumble.
Yeah. Yeah, except focused on IoT devices, whereas Rumble is targeting everything. Which is
but I guess what I'm getting at by that is Rumble is more IP centric internal. They are now branching rapidly into more cloud centric. They're getting more diverse, but they were primarily IT IP centric. Where it sounds like this is something similar.
Yeah, and once you get to the firmware level, things get sticky. And I think that's where the vulnerability, the big three, the QRTs of the vulnerability management space really need somebody to build a solution that can both discover and categorize and understand IoT solutions down to the version of firmware running on them and exactly what make and model they are, because they can't do it at all. It's in my testing, it's terrible. Yeah, they're like, it's embedded Linux, could be anything. We don't know. So
yeah, I don't know much about this company, but there's a great firm out there, Eclipsium, that does discovery down to the firmware.
Yeah, we've had them on the show quite a bit. There's some good folks over at Eclipse.
Yeah, really good company, smart folks. I used to work with them at my last job and was always really impressed with what they built and what they research. And but it is a nascent space for sure, and definitely could use some good players. Sorry, folks at Eclipsium, don't mean to suggest you have competition, but it's an important space.
Yeah, I mean, just a discovery piece. What is this IoT device? What's the state of it? Nobody's doing a great job of that at this point that can do it across all devices on an enterprise, because you literally have to build. You'd have to build parsers, for each type of IoT device out there. I just don't see any other way around it. But you need some kind of signature or some way to fingerprint those devices. So somebody's going to have to build a huge database that's going to constantly grow on a daily basis.
Eclipsium used to be, or was at one point I believe a sponsor of the show, because I remember seeing their ads floating around. But I actually tried to spin up a company. I might have even pitched you on this about 9 years ago, of doing exactly that massive fingerprinting database for IP-centric devices. Remember, but I was doing more home related, but we can set that aside. But it's interesting to see how these markets come and go over the course of a decade.
Yeah. All right, what else do we have here? Might not touch on all the funding raises here. There's some interesting acquisitions. Cloudflare bought Area 1 Security for $162 million, which I've got to imagine is not a great exit for Area 1. Area 1's been around for a while, but I mean, that's the size of some of the Series C's and D's that we're seeing. But that's the acquisition price. Area 1 is interesting. Like, they really focused on phishing.
That's a 2x on money invested. They have $82.5 million invested, 160 out. So it's a 2x on money invested. So not a very successful exit.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're focused kind of more on the email side, but they were kind of competing with the risk IQs. Like, they would help you do takedowns. They would look for evidence that somebody was setting up a phishing campaign to target your company. Or somebody already had, and you'd want to do a takedown of that domain, like some misspelling of CapitalOne.com or something like that is an example here. And yeah, I just didn't hear a ton from them for the last 5 to 7 years. I'm not sure what they were up to, but they just kind of dropped off my radar for a while.
Yep, I got nothing there, buddy. I never really knew them.
Yep. All right, moving on. Let's see. Darktrace picked up an attack surface management company. I've got a list of almost over 24, probably close to 30 companies in the attack surface management space, and I've never heard of Cybersprint. I'm thinking maybe it's because I think they're based in the UK. That could explain some of it, or no, the
may
Netherlands.
Not be marketing to the US. Yeah, they may not be marketing to the US, focused on Europe.
I mean, I don't focus on just the US, but sometimes the channels where I look for companies, where I look to discover companies, like, it's not the US Google that's giving me the right results and stuff like that. Yep. So I do miss stuff. But yeah, interesting that we've seen a decent amount of acquisition in the space. Jonathan Crane's company, Intrigue, got picked up by Mandiant. Obviously, Palo Alto picked up that company that has the same name as the Amazon Prime TV show. Blanking on it.
I can't even help you. I don't know what you're talking about.
Expanse.
Oh, yeah, Expanse, right.
It was definitely an SEO battle to look for that company. Yeah, we've seen a couple in this area. Some of the bigger ones haven't been picked up yet. They've been turning down acquisition offers. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because this is attack surface management is one of those areas where it can provide value for a whole bunch of companies. I don't think vulnerability management vendors are going to necessarily be the buyers here, but all kinds of companies that are kind of tangential to vulnerability management, I think will be picking up these companies. Let's see. And Snyk expands into cloud security. They're already doing some stuff in cloud security, but they're expanding more into there with a pickup of Fugue. And I don't know a ton about Fugue, but
it's a cloud
CSPM?
cloud security kind of CSPM-ish play, for lack of a better term. More app centric, I think. So maybe dabbling in a bit of the web protection platform / CNAPP space, but certainly providing infrastructure as code security, cloud compliance type coverage. It's an interesting space, but that space is commoditizing like crazy, and you're up against some monster players like Prisma and now Wiz and Orca, and it's tough to be competitive in that cloud protection side of the house.
Yeah, they're skewing it as infrastructure as code, which is certainly important, but it does, beg the question about where this space is going, because CSPM is becoming a little amorphous at this point, I think, and
it's a consolidation of a bunch of things, right?
Right.
Well, maybe. I'll counterpoint you on that one. I don't think it's necessarily consolidation of a bunch of things as so much CSPM is the foundation of a lot of cloud native security tools and markets. So it is kind of the underpinning of a bunch of things as opposed to consolidating a bunch of things together. And I think what you'll see is CSPM, in my opinion, instead of being the collector, just because it's part of everything, just kind of ceases to exist in isolation of itself. And you'll see the markets that have it as its base offer CSPM plus something, right? I think that's the direction it goes for me.
I think it's a little like SASE, where different companies, different people define it a little bit differently depending on what they offer, who they're partnered with, who they acquire, etc. And it changes a little bit depending on whom you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. I'd been looking at it kind of like a SASE, where it was a combination of different things, where it was, like the, scanning infrastructure as code for security issues, I just saw as just like one feature of a platform like this. Like most of the CSPMs I've seen have some kind of runtime agent, that's gathering information, or could even do enforcement, configuration changes, stuff like that. Monitoring, guardrails, that kind of stuff, I've seen as pieces of CSPMs. So I had been thinking of it as just a collection of a bunch of products that started life as features and got consolidated. But, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because I've been too exposed to some vendors in this space and not enough to others. And it's gotten muddled in my head.
It's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to watch how the CSPM battle really plays out. But yeah, definitely would love to chat more over a beer with that one with you, Adrian.
Yeah, and I clearly want to take a deeper dive into some of these areas that is something I've traditionally done on the show. Like when we have an interview that doesn't show up, like somebody has a family emergency or something, I try and have some of these deep dives into some of these areas that come up often, but maybe we don't understand real well. I'd like to have maybe a segment just on CSPM to make sure that we understand what's going on in that space.
Absolutely.
All right, almost done here. Definitely want to mention this hot take by Andy Ellis. I don't know if either of you have had a chance to read it. Before I share my thoughts on it, though, because I've actually discussed it with him, I'd like to hear your thoughts if you had a chance to read it.
So I will tell you, I think I know what it says. I have not read it in depth, though, so I'd love to hear the TLDR before I give opinion.
Yeah, you want to make sure you hit the last 3 paragraphs because it's either that or hit the subtitle, because that was the bit that I missed. When I read this first, I thought it was more general, like just SBOM is dumb, like the way you were talking about compliance earlier. But it's then I realized, no, he's specifically talking about the service where you provide the SBOM externally to third parties.
Yep. And is the thought process there that it adds too much risk? Is that the TLDR, that it adds too much risk to be publicly telling what your SBOM is?
No, and so one issue I had with him is I feel like he's talking about SBOM as if you can only do it at a high level of precision. Like, here's the exact library we're using, like the exact version of it, and the version just changed, versus just saying, hey, we use this library in general, and then you don't have to update the SBOM as often. But no, I think it was more of a, juice is not worth the squeeze argument here.
That's a hot take for sure. And it's a hot take I don't necessarily know I agree with, because to me, if we can put automation around SBOM collection and correlation and have it automatically create and automatically update, who cares? Have it automatically happen. Why is that squeeze too hard?
I think it comes down to the subtleties of it and how deep we do go. I mean, I think the idea of an SBOM is really important, but to a certain degree, I really agree with him here, because, if you were to look at adjacent industries, a lot of people saying, SBOM is just like a recipe list. Well, it's not. It's not saying I bake a cake and it has sugar, flour, eggs, whatever you would put in a cake. It's not that high level. It's, where did my flour come from? Was it produced in a factory that also contained nuts, things like that? And you get really complex when you dive into ingredients, if we're comparing it to this recipe idea. For instance, I have a couple of friends who are celiac. I was really unaware before I met these people that things like soy sauce can have gluten or not have gluten, depending on what kind of soy sauce it is. Also, depending on where it's made and how it's made. And so it gets very complicated very quickly. And so if you take that analogy of not all soy sauce is created the same, and not even, if you have the light soy sauce versus the low sodium soy sauce versus, I don't even know, there are tons of different types of soy sauce. Yeah, there's
dark soy sauce, yeah.
Exactly. It starts to get very complicated very quickly. So if you have that high level of, we have soy sauce, that's great, but that precipitates so many other questions that could still leave the risk open if we're talking at supply chain.
Yeah, so I will say I previously worked at a software composition analysis company where their whole job was to look at components. It was a company that did exactly this. There are automated tools that can generate your SBOM right from your software composition analysis tooling, automatically pull out the SBOM, and it does transitive risk and transitive SBOM analysis. So if you pull in library X and library X makes a call or has library Y and Z in it, that transitive nature can be logged within your SBOM. Can be done fully automated in a fully automated way. And they even have a format structure called Cyclone DX, which is an output model of, it's like a SBOM as code, you could almost call it, where you can ingest the Cyclone DX format and act from it. So to me, and I love Andy. Andy's a brilliant guy, and I love that he puts out controversial topics, because I think it opens up and spearheads debate in a healthy way. But I think this is one I'd sit down and drink a beer with him on, because to me, I think automation of SBOM creation is entirely feasible. And then if customers say, hey, what about X? What about Y? Give them the Cyclone DX output. Let them ingest it into their risk engine and make calls that they want to make on the output that you have. It can be fully automated. So I don't see it as a negative. Now, all that being said, I haven't read this article in depth, so maybe there's some nuance in there I'm not getting. But I would take the counterpoint on this one for sure.
So two thoughts here, and we can move on. But my first thought being, I think it can be simpler and still have value. I don't think the SBOM needs to necessarily include precise versioning. Every time a change is made, the provenance, where and how you installed it, and where from. I think even the most basic SBOM, can have value and be useful. So that's kind of one thing. I feel like he's kind of set up as a straw man here, that Like he uses the most complex example and says, see, it's just not worth the work. And I'm like, well, if you were to simplify all that stuff and make it easy and do it fully automated, like what you're saying, Tyler, I think like it wouldn't destroy all the value. Sure, I get what you're saying in some cases. Like, and my other thought, to play devil's advocate with my own opinion here, when that UA parser JS NPM package got hacked, you were only vulnerable to it if you installed it from npm, because the malware that got installed through the installer script. So if your CI/CD was pulling that from GitHub and not installing it from npm, you would have been fine, because that installer script only lived at npm.
Yeah.
So the malicious piece wasn't in the library.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a good guest that we can bring on around this topic for a future date. I'll look to bring him on, because I think this is a super fun topic that we can deep dive.
Absolutely. And speaking of SBOM, the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency, CISA, is, and I say speaking of SBOM just because the executive order had SBOMs in it, and so seeing lots of references to SBOMs in federal stuff now. But yeah, they released a list of free cybersecurity services and tools, which is kind of refreshing coming from the government. So I like this kind of stuff, seeing this kind of stuff.
Big fan. Free is generally never free, but when it is truly free, that would be wonderful. Usually it comes with some kind of cost, human cost, resource cost. It's usually something.
My favorite saying is free as piano, not free as beer.
Exactly.
Like somebody gives you a free piano, you're like, where the hell am I going to put that? Who's going to move it? Who's going to take it up the stairs? Who's going to take it down your stairs? Like somebody's going to die moving this thing, but it's free.
Exactly.
Whereas a beer, like you just drink the beer. That's truly free. Or
I'll find out a way. Honestly, if somebody gave me a free piano, I'd figure out a way to get it home.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and me too, because I actually just got rid of one, after selling our house, but we almost died moving it. But there
are these things
I just don't have room for it.
You can hire piano movers.
Yes, you can, and that's what I did the second time I moved it. I did hire piano movers.
Right, and they're probably not as expensive as security engineers.
They are not. And for our squirrel story today, bringing it close to home for Mr. Tyler Shields here, I actually enjoyed this. So Jupiter One has a version of Wordle that has a cybersecurity and IT specific dictionary behind it, which completely changes how you play the game. I found out. Like, no more are you just looking for stuff that helps you with the English language. That doesn't help you anymore. Like, whatever strategy you have for Wordle doesn't work when you change the dictionary to something that could have acronyms in it or abbreviations in it. So I actually I appreciated that, Tyler. Like
yeah,
no, I didn't. I hated it. You took up way too much of my time, and I only had to use 3 guesses to get it. But it took me so much longer than it should have, and so I hate it.
Which word did you do? There's a new word every single day.
I can't tell you. What if somebody's going on and playing today?
Well, they can't because it's from the other day. It's gone.
It's from the historical words.
You can say it's
gone.
It
was cloud. That should have been like...
Oh, you see, you just ruined it. That's today's.
Yeah, no, Adrian, it was not.
It's today's.
It took me at least a good 15 minutes to figure it out, and so I hate your game. I hate it.
You know which one really irked me, Adrian? The one that just had me fuming is ASCII.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I got it in one try. I got today's in one try.
Oh, yeah, of course you did, because KT just gave you the word.
See, I told you, but you guys made me say it. I could at least see where ASCII would drive you nuts, but cloud, really, it should have been there, and it wasn't, and so your game sucks.
So I will tell all the people on the stream, live show that are seeing this, definitely click on the ESW show notes, or you can go to twitter.com/TXS. I think my most recent tweet is a link to the Wordle game, and you can find it through there.
Are you allowed to use Wordle in your promotion?
We are not. It's actually called the Cybersecurity Word Game.
There you go. Just making sure, for compliance.
That was me saying it. I'm the only one that said Wordle.
No, I said it. Shh, don't tell anybody. My legal team, we actually had to debate with the legal team whether what words we could actually use it to market it.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's probably smart.
So
it's
there's
probably now that the New York Times owns it.
Exactly, there were very specifically crafted terms that we use on the landing page for that reason.
Nice. Yeah, I did notice that cybersecurity word game. I was like, you guys are really trying to not say Wordle.
Correct. Yes, I do not use that Wordle.
Yeah. The first one I did was Q, and it took me all 6 tries. QUEUE.
I'm not going to lie. The first 3 I tried, I failed at all 3. I didn't get it.
Oh, wow.
That's probably because I'm stupid. That's a whole other problem.
Well, I tried with cyber, then I tried with asset. But it took me 15 minutes. The whole thing. It was a nightmare. You wasted 15 minutes of my time, Mr. Tyler Shields.
My entire goal in life is to waste your time, Katie.
Oh, man, that is strategic. That is straight up strategic.
Pure strategery.
All right. Thanks so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining me today. Big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Y'all are the best. Don't let anybody tell you different.